is gone. And out of those four philosophies of Judaism that we've talked about, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, and the Essenes, the Pharisees are the only ones that are standing, and it's during the years following the destruction of the temple that Judaism morphs into a different kind of a religion than it was before the destruction of the temple. The Pharisees are the only ones that are left. The Sadducees that were kind of hidebound to the temple, they are the priestly group. They're the aristocrats. They're the ones that lost everything with the destruction of Jerusalem. The Zealots are gone. The Zealots are wiped out in 72 AD at Masada, and they no longer exist. Nobody knows what happens to the Essenes. They're just off the map. The Pharisees, though, are very flexible in the way that they can deal theologically with life, and so they the last one standing, and they are able to morph into a different kind of a Judaism. For instance, there's no more sacrifices at the temple because the temple doesn't exist. The prayers of the heads of households, begin to take the place of those sacrifices, and it's not long after that they start putting together the oral tradition. Teaching of the rabbis becomes written down, and it becomes Talmud and Mishnah. But that is the two temple periods: Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, with Zerubbabel's in the middle. And in Ezra chapter 3, the builders have laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord. The priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, the writers of many psalms with cymbals, took their places to praise the Lord, as described by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever, a refrain that is found throughout the Old Testament. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid. Reason being, while many others shouted for joy. The reason being that this temple, as they could tell in its early stages, was not going to be anything like the temple that they had seen in the early years of their life. And now they're coming back, and they're in the land, but the temple, synonymous with the presence of God, all of that is going to be a struggle for them. Getting to the temple site, where the temple is located, has a history that goes all the way back to Genesis. You'll remember in Genesis chapter 22, you have what is known in Hebrew as the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And that is, after all of these years of waiting, Abraham and Sarah have a son. His name is Isaac. And then the Hebrew says, while he is a young lad, probably early teen years, right in there someplace, God comes to him and says, I want you to go to a place that I'm going to show you, the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain that I will show you. And you know the story. Somehow Abraham, in this tremendous faith that he has in God, not perfect, but a profound, significant faith in God, does this. And they go to Mount Moriah, and the lad is, who's been carrying the wood, all of that is put down. He's bound, and he is, being ready to sacrifice. And the book of Hebrews tells us that Abraham's knowledge of God had become so profound and personal and deep that he knew in his mind that God could be trusted, and that this son who he was supposed to sacrifice is the son through whom everything was going to be channeled. And in his mind, he was able to see that God would deliver him back to Abraham and Sarah from the dead. And so in faith, he's going through, and the story, there's, the angel says from the heavens, says, stop. And there is this sacrifice, the ram that's in the bush is caught, that becomes the provided sacrifice. And the name Yahweh Yireh means, God will provide, and that's the name that comes to us about God there at that story. And so it becomes this, this really profound, meaningful story, not only for the Hebrews but for Christians alike. And that happens in the region of Mount Moriah. And then you know the story at the end of 1 Chronicles. It's about chapter 21, chapter 22, David is at the end of his life, decides to count his fighting men. And you know what happens? There's this issue of pride and all of these things that begin to well up in David, and David is going to be castigated by God, and he's given, a choice on how to deal with the consequences of his sin. And the one that David chooses, the death angel comes into Israel, and he's wiping out the people. And David is just grief-stricken and broken as when he sees what is happening to Israel. And he asks God to stop. And as this angel is at the door of the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, he stops. And Solomon, this is where Solomon begins to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. And again, the idea of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac in the region of Moriah on the mountain, what happens in Israel with David and his sin and the death angel, and you have God, providing a sacrifice so that we as humans don't have to die for sin, but a sacrifice is provided. Begins to be this theme that you hear about throughout the Old Testament. You get to the place where the temple is being built, and it is in the place where God's mercy overrides his judgment, and he stops, and people are spared, and life is spared in God's mercy. And so you can see sort of the background to Moriah and the building of the temple site, where the people, according to Deuteronomy, this is the place, this temple is this place where people are going to sacrifice for their sins and come to grips with the presence of God in all of life and in creation. Now, the temple itself had gates all the way around it that you could go into, and obviously some of those gates are not there today, and some of the ones that are have been blocked up, like the Golden Gate, for instance, and the two Huldah gates. But when you're entering the temple, you come to what is known as the monumental staircase. If you look at pictures of the Temple Mount pre-1968, it's basically, this whole area is underground. It's just covered in dirt. And it's after 68 that all of these things, like the monumental staircase, is found. It's 215 feet wide, and it contains 30 steps up to the top where you go into the Huldah gates to go up. And as I mentioned before, the stairs are staggered. There are wide ones and there are narrow ones. And it's just, it's done in such a way that you have to think about, you have to watch your steps. And what you're watching are the steps that are leading you up to worship God. And nobody just runs up to God, in a non-thinking, thoughtless way. The steps were created that way in order for there to be some thoughtfulness as you're walking up. The sacrifices were never supposed to be done quickly. At the very first page of Leviticus, what is it you're supposed to do with the animal that you sacrifice? You just don't hand it over and walk away. You put your hands on its head. And the way that these staircases were created was to help slow people down so that they could be much more sober-minded in what it is that they're going to the temple to do. Slow down. We are going into the presence of God. Sacrifice, a life, blood's going to be shed, sins being forgiven, the celebration of life, because God is merciful and because he's patient and he's loving and he forgives people. And these steps were part of that process. And we'll see a picture of those here in just a minute. There are two Huldah gates. There's a triple Huldah gate, and these served as the main entryway to the temple from the south side, and were probably the main entryway into the temple during the time of Jesus. So basically, you would go up the steps, and there would be a patio, and then there would be the wall on which the royal stoa on the south end would be, and you would have these triple gates that you would go into, and you would continue up the steps, and you would come out of a big hole in the temple platform. You'd come up, and then you would go to the north, and that would be where the temple is, and then you would have a wall around that temple platform. And the triple Huldah gate served as the main entryway to the temple. And then you would have the double Huldah gate. can't really see it as clearly as you can see the triple gates. The triple gates are no longer gates. You can see the outline of the gates, and you can even see some of the original Herod the Great stones that are there on that patio right there by the Holy Gates. They've been filled in. There have been so many wars that have been fought. You don't allow a gate to exist without putting some rocks, in front of it to keep the enemy out. But the double Holy Gate was where you were up on the Temple Mount. You would go down the hole, down the steps, and you would come out the double gates. So if you're going up the triple gates, the rabbis, you see this in Talmud. As you're going up the triple gates, if there was somebody going down, kind of like a salmon going upstream, it's going the wrong direction, that was usually a sign that that person was in mourning. And it was a sign that, if this person was coming down while everybody is going up, this is a person that needs to be comforted because of some grief that has entered into their life. Because typically they would be going down the double Holy Gate. And again, I'll show you some pictures of these in just a second. You have the mikvahs. Mikvah is a Jewish ceremonial baptistry, very small, really only room for one person. There was a little bit of water that would drip into it so that it would qualify as living water, but there have been 48 of these. Mikvaot is the plural of it. 48 of these have been found among the structures that are around that monumental staircase where pilgrims would go through ritual cleansing before they would go up into the Temple Mount and do the kinds of things that they would do up there around the temple. When you think of Acts chapter 2 and the 3,000 being baptized, how long would that take here? Marching 3,000 people and doing them one at a time. There are 48 of these down on the south end, and that would help explain how that could happen in Acts chapter 2 on Pentecost when the 3,000 are baptized. And then you have the royal stoa, which was located on the upper portion of the southern wall, and it ran the entire length of the wall. And what is interesting about this, this was not something that happened for a very long time, but it is told that during the time of Jesus, and you'll know that there were two recorded cleansings of the temple, and typically, when you're going to the temple, you're going to pay a temple tax, and if you were from out of town, out of the nation, you would probably have not the right kind of coin to be able to pay it. It would have somebody's face on it, or it would just be considered pagan. So you would trade that coin for one that would qualify for the temple tax. At the same time, you would go with your animal. And most of the animals were bought at an area that was around the top of the Mount of Olives. But during the time of Jesus, they were also being sold in this area around the royal stoa. And what would happen is if you bought one, if you're traveling 80, 90, 100 miles with an animal that is blemished, by the time you get to the end of the road and a week's worth of traveling, chances are that animal's not going to be without blemish. And so it was just a practice and accepted that you would just buy the animal when you got there, and that would be your sacrifice, unblemished animal. But during the time of Jesus, if you bought one that had not come from this particular area, when you showed it to the priest, he would find some kind of a blemish on it, and it would be disqualified. And so a lot of the trouble that was happening in this area of the royal stoa was that animals were not being accepted, and so you would have to buy an animal that was being sold there. And again, we're talking, this is a very narrow period of time, and it's right there in the time of Jesus' ministry, where there was some mafia type scam going on with trying to buy these really expensive animals without blemish, and the ones that were being bought across the valley were not going to count. And it explains, the exorbitant exchange rates to get a coin that would qualify as a temple tax, plus what you had to pay for this animal. People's feelings of wanting to be pure in heart and all peacemakers and all of the they were struggling with "Thou shalt not kill." That's why they were struggling with that, and this is one of the reasons why Jesus becomes so irritated and annoyed at what he sees happening there. It's a den of robbers rather than a place of prayer for the nations, and so the royal stoa has a history behind it too. So this would be the royal stoa. this right here. And it would be 2 stories. Again, as we've said before, this model, even though its scale, I don't think depicts what it looked like during the first century, during the time of Jesus. But the Hulda gates would have been along this wall down at the bottom. Here's the patio. There are steps going up to it like this. The western wall, by the way, is just on the other side of this wall right here. If you look at the pictures that we've seen recently in class of the Golden Gate is more in this area right here. Fortress Antonia would be right there, which I think is the correct place for it. One of the most iconic pictures, symbols of Jerusalem today is the Dome of the Rock. It was built at the end of the 7th century by Umayyad Caliph al-Malik, and it is the oldest Islamic structure that's still in existence. The foundation rock in Judaism is significant as a place that God created the heavens and the earth as well as Adam. The foundation rock is what is underneath the dome in the Dome of the Rock. It's just significant in Judaism as a place where God created the heavens and the earth. What is always ironic to me is here's this rock that that God is creating the heavens and the earth when it sounds like it's already been created. And creating Adam there, even though we don't know where the Garden of Eden was, this is not anywhere very close to the Euphrates or the Tigris or those rivers that formed that area that was around the Garden of Eden. But in terms of Judaism, this rock that is underneath the Dome of the Rock is significant in the sense that they say this is the place where God created the heavens and the earth as well as Adam. For the Muslims, though, this is the place where Muhammad was participating in his 2-part night journey. One of the parts of the journey was for him to land where he did, and this becomes the place where the furthest, where a mosque is going to be the farthest it can be from the center of Islam. It's also, where, Muhammad on his trip to heaven, all of it is supposed to have taken place where this rock is located underneath the Dome of the Rock. The original covering was lead. And it isn't until more recent history that there was a gold-colored covering that became the top of the Dome of the Rock and made it so iconic that when you see it, you don't ever forget what it looks like. It is a stunning building. If we were to look at a map of the present Temple Mount, Haram Esh-Sharif, it would look basically like this. You have here's the eastern wall with the Kidron Valley right here. The Golden Gate, as you can see, is not centered in that wall, but is towards the northeast corner. The Dome of the Rock is centered right in the middle of the temple platform. The double Hulda gate is located right here. The third would be the triple gate would be located about right here. There is, I'll show you a picture. There is actually a hole, or it's actually an opening in the temple platform where it's either the double or the triple. I'm not sure which, where those stairs would have led to that particular hole in the floor of the temple platform for people to go up into the Temple Mount. This is the gate in which most people enter into through security and all of that to go into the temple platform. I'll show you what you see as you go through that gate here in just a minute. The Eye of the Needle gate is going to be in this area right here. What is interesting is that there's a minaret-looking structure called the Dome of the Spirits. It's located right there. There are stones that are dated to the time of Solomon right here, and they're ashlar stones, which are stones that are milled to form part of the facade of a structure. And so if you look at the Golden Gate and you go straight across, you have an idea. Remember, it said in Talmud that you can look from the Holy of Holies through the holy place, through the Golden Gate. And so this kind of forms that line right there that would go through the middle of the Golden Gate. The Fortress Antonia would have been located right here. The Lion's Gate or Stephen's Gate would have been located right here. Again, this is the Kidron Valley. The Garden of Gethsemane would have been this area over here on the other side with the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. And this is a very important place too that we'll talk about next week, that corner right there at the Tyropian Valley. But that is basically the way that the Temple Mount looks today. There is a fountain right here called the Cup that we'll show you a picture of in just a second. And this is where it's a fountain. There's a big cup, and there looks like a giant galvanized trough around it with faucets going around it, and these really cool looking stone chairs where if you're a Muslim and according to Islam at some time of prayer you need to go to the mosque to pray, before you would go in you would sit in one of those chairs and do your cleansing of the feet and so on and so forth before you go into the mosque. And that mosque is located, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is located right there. So here, that's the entrance to that mosque. We were not allowed to go into it on this last trip. I don't think gringos are allowed in there anymore. In '99, we went in. There looked like there was $1 billion worth of Persian, but some of the most gorgeous Persian rugs you have just ever seen in your life. And it is stunning to see a room that is that big, that is dedicated to prayer. And you walk in and you're very, very quiet, and I mean there are just people, men and boys that are bowed down in prayer as far as you can see. Is really an awesome sight. Here's the view from the Kidron Valley from the east side looking west of the Dome of the Rock. As you can see, very iconic. Everything looks the same. Cedar trees, evergreens and rock, and then in the middle of all that, a gold gigantic dome. It stands out and, is probably one of the scenes most associated with Jerusalem today. Here is another picture of it a little bit closer up. This picture was taken, I think, from the Seven Arches, which is the Intercontinental Hotel that was owned by Syria. I don't even know if it's in service today, but they have a gigantic window that is the length of one side of their cafeteria. And in the morning, a lot of times as a tour group, you get there at sundown. And you go in, you drop off your luggage, and then you go down to the buffet, and they have the curtains drawn. But in the morning, the curtains are drawn back, and it's just this gigantic window, and you sit down and that's your view, the first view of Jerusalem. It is a stunning sight. Here you see the Golden Gate off to the right side of the wall there. And this is a close-up of the Dome of the Rock. You have right here everything is politicized, even your tours. And the reason I took this picture in '16 was this right here. Said, nobody look at it right now, but when you have a chance, look at that corner and you will see the face of Satan. And we went, what? And he said, the face of Satan is on the side of the mosque. And I'm thinking to myself, oh man, is this like seeing the face of Maria in a tortilla? Or, I mean, what is the deal here? And then you kind of meander close to it, and you actually do see kind of a scary face. But, it just, you look up in that ceiling right there, and you're going to see Frankenstein someplace, right? So, it's just the politicizing of everything. Nobody ever gets very far from the politics when you're in Israel. But this is the main entrance to the Dome of the Rock. It's from the east. So if you're on that eastern wall where the Kidron Valley is located, you'd walk up these steps and go through these arches into the Dome of the Rock. Again, in 1999, we went into the Dome of the Rock. You get to see the foundation. What's really interesting about that foundation rock too is that it's a rock. but there's so much significance that is laid to this particular rock. This is the rock where, you know, Muhammad did his thing. This is the rock, according to the Jews, where God, you know, is creating everything, even though the rock, you know, was just a rock in space that, you know, he created a world around. I mean, your imagination runs wild with this sort of stuff, but it's, you know, it's amazing the deep abiding significance worth dying over that, you know, this rock has in this particular part of the world. This is the cup you can see right there inside of the green fence, the cup where the water is coming out. You can see the faucets and the seats that go around it. Guys take their shoes off, they go down, they begin to wash their hands, they wash their feet, wash their face, and then they're ready to go up into the mosque to pray. Here's the temple entrance. When you walk through the gate, you go through all the security, you go now into through this gate, and you're inside the walls of the temple, and you're on the platform. This is what you begin to see. And these two cats right here, very nonchalant in sitting and conversing, these guys are actually watching to make sure that whoever comes through those gates is going to be touring that area are showing the right kind of respect and are dressed appropriately. And our tour guide and the tour host have been very good in saying, you know, ladies, make sure that you have your scarf. You know, we're going up on the Haram Sharif, and you got to be covered. And, you know, it's you know, Islamic people are in charge of it, and this is what they want. And we had one lady that forgot. And so, you know, everybody else had their scarves over their head. Everybody was fine. One lady didn't, and these two guys jetted over to our group and started saying something very, you know, here's the thing. You don't know if anybody's mad or not, because you could be ordering coffee or threatening death, and it sounds the same. And in Hebrew and in the Arabic languages, but the next thing we know, they got the attention of our guide, and he is going straight to that lady, say, put that scarf over your head, and they were fine with it. But yeah, these guys were watching to make sure that everything was. They would not say kosher, but that's the word I use. Here's the double Hulda gate. We are standing at sort of where the bottom of the monumental stairs would be. You can see the stair steps that are going up. The Hulda gate would be in this area right here. So it's basically covered up except for a little remnant of it. The triple gate is clear to see, and we'll show you some pictures of that in just a second. These ladies right here have a very important part to play up on the temple platform as well. You have the two guys who are making sure that, you know, nobody's knees are showing, male or female, and that the females have a head covering. These ladies right here, sort of a coffee clatch, knitting and visiting until they see somebody doing something that looks religious but not in an Islamic way. So if they see something that looks like a Jewish way of praying or a Christian prayer and it doesn't look Islamic, these ladies are paid by the state to heckle you until you stop doing it. And, you know, again, serious business when you get up on the temple platform. This, if you are looking towards the north, this is where the Fortress Antonia would have been located. Here's the Golden Gate, the inside of it, which we've talked about before. Here's another view of the inside of it. As you can see, that this gate with the double walls has all been filled in. This goes back to the Crusades. But if you're standing in the middle of that gate that we just looked at, and you're looking back to the west, the temple, if guys like Lean Rittmeyer and guys like that are correct, the temple would have been located in this area right here. This thing right here, the Dome of the Spirit, there has been discovered that stone that goes back to the time of Solomon, that has been dated. It goes back that far. The Dome of the Rock is back in this direction right here. This would have been just north of it, and this would have been the area where the temple would have been located if these guys, and I think they are, at least that's what I'm going with. This is probably where the temple was located. And here is the stone that gets dated back to the time of Solomon, and a lot of it has been covered up. As soon as something is found that proves that there was a Jewish presence or could be construed as a Jewish presence in Israel, especially in this particular area, it gets covered up and cordoned off. But this is still a remnant that you can see that goes back to that ashlar stone that goes to the time of Solomon. This is the triple gate. And the triple gate is really significant in a lot of ways, because you can see the triple gate easily enough there, and you see, the steps. Here are the steps that are going up to it, part of the monumental steps. And between these set of steps and these over in this area, you would have mikvahs. But what is really cool about this particular part of that southern wall is that you can see right here the gate. That's the seam of the gate right there as it goes up, and you can see these stones right here, and you can actually see it better in this picture right here. These particular stones, Herod the Great was the only one that quarried stones that had a recessed fringe about them. So if we go back, you can see some of these recessed stones where Wayne, Jordan, and I are touching. These would have been stones that, as Jesus is going up through the triple gate, these are stones that he would have touched. These would have been there when Jesus was going up into the temple during his time in his ministry on earth. And again, here's another example of it. When you go to the wall, not all the stones are square. A lot of the stone, when the Crusaders, during the Crusades, you would have parts of the wall torn down, but it's a perfect fortress, and it's such a holy place that lots of battles were waged around this thing, and so rocks were being reinserted into the wall, and that's why you have walls with little rocks in them, and you have parts of the wall with big rocks in them, and some of them that have this recessed fringe around them were there during the time of Jesus. This right here, you can see that as an opening. That's about as close as we could probably get to it. And I was taking this picture with this iPad, so it looks like I'm standing in with a flat screen television. It's very stealthy, and I didn't want to draw a whole lot of attention to myself. But that is either the double gate or the triple gate. That is where you would have if it's triple gate, that's where you would have come up out of onto the temple platform, or if it's the double gate, that's where you would have gone down to leave the temple platform. And there's a lot of activity in all of this area right here. People going in and out, in and out, in and out. A lot of it is under the Al-Aqsa Mosque and its precinct. So, who knows what's going on down there, but it is closed off from the outside and closed off to tourists. There's no way to get close to that and see exactly what's happening. Here's an example of a mikvah. You would have gone down the steps, you would have stripped down, gone down into these steps. It's very private, and you would have dunked yourself, immersed yourself in the water and come back out. And they have uncovered 48 of these in that area on the south side. And this would have been there during the time of Jesus. These mikvah baths, and you can kind of see where they're kind of laid out as you look out off of that monumental staircase. And that, my friends, is the temple platform. Lots more that you can say about it, but that's sort of a one-shot sampling of what it is to be up on that temple platform where the Dome of the Rock is located, where the gates, the Golden Gates and the Morocco Gate and the mosque and the Dome of the Rock and all of that history is located. What we're going to do next Wednesday night, is we're going to talk about the outside. We're going to talk about the arches. We'll talk about the Tyropian Valley. We'll talk about the significance of the southwest corner of the temple, and talk about some of the daily activities that would have happened around it, so that as you go, you kind of get a picture of what life might have looked like during the time of Jesus. So I'll let you out 5 minutes early.